E allora si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene. Si è voltato improvvisamente alla gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Civiltà dell'amore. Fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this 45th edition of the Rimini meeting. The title is, If we are not in search of the essence, what are we looking for?
This meeting is dedicated to the figure of Father Giussani and in particular to his passion for literature. What role does literature play in his life, in his thought, in his educational action? The perspective of the dialogue we are going to have is not that of analysis of literary criticism of the works cited by Giussani. The desire that moves us is to deepen our understanding of Father Giussani's personality through this gateway. It is enough to read some of his speeches or some of his texts. Think, for example, of Il senso religioso, the religious sense, to realize that literature plays a fundamental role in his formation as a man and as a priest, in his view of reality and his presentation of the faith. As I begin this dialogue, I cannot but recall with particular gratitude that on 17th July last, Pope Francis wrote a letter to all the faithful on the role of literature in formation. Initially, as he says, it was indeed for the formation of priests, but then he decided, because of its importance, to extend it to all the faithful. In that letter, the Pope emphasizes the fundamental role of literature for the formation of every man and every priest, with beautiful pages, which we can also take up later. Today's dialogue sees the presence of two valuable guests. Founder of the priestly fraternity of the missionaries of St. Charles Borromeo, Bishop Camisasca, founder of the priestly fraternity of the missionaries of St. Charles Borromeo and Bishop Emeritus of the Diocese of Reggio Emilia and Guastalla, Giancarlo Cesana, Honorary Professor of General and Applied Hygiene at the University of Milan, Bicocca. Our guests are valuable for two reasons. The first is that both have enjoyed a long personal acquaintance with Father Giussani, as well as sharing responsibility for the movement. The second is that they are two people who have reflected and are reflecting on Father Giussani and the experience born of him. I am thinking of the various books of Monsignor Camisasca on the history of the movement and on Giussani, including a volume that came out a few weeks ago. An introduction to I am thinking of the many articles of Prof. Cesana on the figure of Father Giussani, or lastly, of the care he took in editing the volume by Father Fabio Baroncini, also published a few weeks ago, which contains precisely his presentation of the great works that Father Giussani proposed to the movement. So let us begin our dialogue.
We'll begin with a few questions. First, you, Don Massimo.
You have always sought to deepen Giussani's thought. The re-edition of your book on Giussani, revised in the light of the lectures you gave at the Santa Croce University in Rome. What are you discovering with respect to the theme of this meeting? Where did Giussani's sensitivity for literature came from? What place did it have in the education he received?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to start with a personal recollection. In the high school years, 1962 to 65, my high school years, Giussani, the religion teacher, I was very impressed listening to him by the way he called back to authors like Leopardi, Pascoli, Pavesi, Adenegri, Thomas Mann, Peggy, Mounier, Cladel, Milosh, and so on. Some of them I knew, others I was completely ignorant about them, completely unknown to me. I was already a good leader, a good reader of literary texts and poetry, but what thunderstruck me was the depth of his choices, his capacity to grasp hidden depths, hidden layers of the human that I'd never known how to dig them out without his help. For example, I asked myself, why does he choose certain poems by Pascoli? For example, the book, Il Libro. Giussani read it, he even recited it by memory in the class, and he asked, what does it mean, mystery of life? How can the mystery reveal itself? And why did he read Mounier to us, his letters about pain, and his works, not his political works, but, for example, presenting letters about pain to us, already anticipated back in the 1960s, the theme of the end of life, which in those years was only hinted at in the lay press. And who made him know the Lithuanian playwright Oskar Miloš? So these memories, these recollections and questions straight away introduce us to a question. Why does Giussani, in his seminary years and in the first decades of his ministry, why had he read so much? What was he seeking? On the 17th of July, last Pope Francis wrote a letter about the role of literature in formation, as was said. I'll read a couple of lines of it. It's possible to recognize the presence of the Spirit in the variegated human realities. It's possible, in other words, to grasp the seed that's already planted by the presence of the Holy Spirit in events, in sensibilities, in desires, in the deep tensions of the heart and of social contexts, social, cultural, spiritual, through literature. So I can say that Giussani had worked in a similar way. I think that he sought, above all, the beauty, the dramatic beauty. It seems an oxymoron, but put together those words. This noun, this adjective, dramatic beauty, to discover the sense, the meaning, the sense, its weight. Nobody like Ratzinger knew how to express these words of Giussani. He defined him as a man who was wounded by the desire for beauty. And then he added, the blade of beauty struck him right all the way to opening him a metaphysical wound. This splendid phrase of Ratzinger, ontology and existence fuse themselves in a single journey, a single path. The beauty, the nostalgia for the infinite. He was sensitive to those. He faced them there. Christ, he faced him with more emotion, with more realism in those places than in any theological text or book of piety. So for this reason, Don Giussani always turned with extreme interest to the artistic works, right from his youth. From music, first of all, accompanied by his dad, as we know, and then poetry and literature, introduced by his teachers in the seminary, but above all, introduced in themselves by his passion itself for man. Above all, his passion for the man Giussani himself. He never felt, never heard a verse, a melody, or saw a picture as an event that was reserved for particularly cultured people. He recognized instead in all of an expression of the human, a help to comprehend life. A song, otherwise, or a poet. They weren't, in his eyes and to his heart, things that are different from the mountains, from the sea, from flowers, from all that could strike us, make us happy, point us back to all of reality, to the infinite, with greater clarity and strength. He himself wrote, he wrote this phrase, this stupendous phrase, in beauty is the something other that to which man renders his homage, from which he awaits, he expects, he awaits, he expects. The artistic work, fact, has become the heart of his pedagogy, as those know who live the life of CL. Because, why? In beauty, there's hidden the truth, which all of us, knowingly or not, we all aspire to. Working this last couple of years on the book that's just come out, the introduction to Don Giussani, I had the chance to reflect on the fact that he has been, for me, the teacher who had introduced me with more awareness to the poetic words and literature. Through him, I was able to know better myself and the value of my life. Just so I can say, finishing up the answer to this question, that Giussani, even through the authors who he made me know, he's opened wide my window to many other authors He opened me up to them. So, not being all of them himself, he opened me to the totality.
Grazie, Don Massimo.
Thank you, Don Massimo. A question now to Giancarlo.
Giussani often spoke of culture. Culture, for him, is not vast erudition, but a synthetic viewpoint of everything. What does his passion for literature reveal about Father Giussani's conception of culture?
So, first and foremost, I would like to say that I became close to the movement. The way I became close to the movement was rather problematic. So when I was 17, I asked our parish priest to have CL come to my village, and so he made the CL youth come, and I experienced a reality that I thought was, it seemed a bit more developed. It was the only Catholic youth group that was around there in those days. But when these GS, these Student Youth Society students arrived, they began to talk about Christ. My fundamental interest was a social change, let's say. And I remember that we had a long discussion about charity work, and I'll tell you more about it later. Because they said, as they still do say among the CLU and the GS, that to do charity work, there you can learn about the love of God. And I told them, and why do the poor care if you learn about God's love? What about justice? And I thought I was right, like with many other things. But so I created an anti-CL youth group, a Catholic group, but it was still, we'd even go to Mass every evening. But so let's say we'd be in the church, and the CL group would meet in the parish hall 5 meters away, just across the road. And every now and again, I'd poke my head in. I was curious by the personality of those who were my classmates, because back in those days it was primarily university students in CL, and I was intrigued by these youngsters, these university people. I was shocked by the seriousness with which they cultivated their friendship with high school students. And so I went to one of their meetings one day, where one of these guys who is now my friend was speaking. He was a great footballer, but while he was great at football, let's say that at school, I thought I was better in school than he was. So he presented us Dante's Ulisse. And I said, so how can this guy talk about Dante's Ulisse? I didn't think he was that smart. And he presented it in such a way, the way he spoke about it, that I was profoundly struck. I'd never heard anything like this. Because, yes, I'd studied the Divine Comedy in school as well, but Ulysses was sent to hell because he'd made the Trojan horse, and by doing that had conquered the city of Troy. But the idea of the lies, the fraudulence of Odysseus of Ulysses was even more, was seen as a way of how intelligent people can cheat, which is always very dangerous. So how can this fraudulence, he'd convinced his own friends to go through the pillars of Hercules, to go to the ends of the earth, to enter into the mystery, to go into what doesn't belong to man with a small ship, with a tiny little boat. It was insufficient truly for the journey. He appropriated himself with God's faculties, and because of this they sunk, and they all died. I'd never heard this story before. I'd heard DeSantis' commentaries, but I'd never heard of an explanation like this, and especially from one that I would never have expected was capable of doing this. And so then I understood that there was another school of thought, I learned that there was a school beyond school that was, and it taught something else that was very deep, and I tried to look for it, and from there I truly began to become close to the movement. So, like Baroncini says, and I'll talk about him at the end, Don Fabio Baroncini, even he was struck by Giussani because Giussani proposed an intelligent way of living one's faith. Intelligent not in the sense of the intellect, but something deeper. So this passionate search for the truth and its discovery, a truth that illuminates reality, and it helps us to affront even when times are hard, even when reality is difficult. This way of living one's faith, not a faith that's basically just a fairy tale, a story for children that you hear being spoken about often, and that's the thing that literally is the most annoying thing for me in the world. Rather, this was about true intelligence towards reality. This was my introduction to the movement, and I'll say some more later. Thank you, Giancarlo. On this anecdote of Giancarlo's, I'd like to say something for a brief kind of twist of irony. When I was in high school, I was also struck by Dante's Odysseus, and I remember a day in school. I wasn't a model student, let's say. The teacher began to talk, and I got up and I said, "I don't agree. I think you're wrong." Except then I wasn't able to defend my idea, and it was a massive disaster. But Dante's Ulysses struck me as well. You were also sunk by the ocean. Yeah, I fell hook, line, and sinker there. But a question for Massimo. Don Giussani's pages on Leopardi are fascinating. The way he represents it, and from what I've read, I think about some famous pages from all his works, where Leopardi speaks of Leopardi like a friend. So I wanted to ask you, help us to understand.
What kind of experience was it for him to meet an author, to become passionate about her work?
So it's natural that the books of Giussani are full of recalls to poets, to prose texts, to theatre works, to diaries, biographies. And we're not talking only about citations of bits as if Giussani wanted to sustain his theses, enriching them by another. But they are contributions welcomed as an integral part of what he's saying. So citations don't have the aim to demonstrate that Giussani's right, but to deepen the significance and open the horizons of the people who read it, who meditate on it. So the authors, if we go deep down, there are hundreds and hundreds of them. But the relationship that Giussani had lived, and here's the answer, with the authors of poetic and literary texts can't be described in the same way for all of them. With some of them, I think, for example, Pasolini, he discovered a similar judgment. They were in line about what was going on in society. Both of them had warned about the anthropological and cultural revolution of the 1960s that was worked by the capitalist bourgeoisie. And as well as Pasolini, we can talk about Testori and T.S. Eliot. With other authors, instead, Don Giussani lived with them. He lived a real and true common experience with them. The most evident examples are Leopardi, Peggy, but Leopardi and Peggy, he met them in different moments in his life. I'll just look at the first one of these, on Leopardi. So what does it mean that this affirmation that Giussani, he cites in Francesco, that Giussani was that Leopardi was his friend. Giussani himself said that he met Leopardi at 12 or 13 years of age. If I hadn't heard him say it himself, I'm not sure I'd believe that I think it was a fib. How can anybody at 12 or 13 years old meet Leopardi in such a way as to be marked by him to such a degree? So being therefore very wounded, and that some months I only read his poems, says Giussani, with my head down, and I didn't study anything else. This memory of his remains for me an amazing fact. It reveals to me the depth of a young boy who already felt so acutely the mystery of his existence and the possibility of solitude, of the nothingness. So far to identify himself with a poetic and life itinerary like the greatest in our literature. So how greater yet, because Giussani detached himself from this. He might have lost himself. He might have got lost if he'd continued to follow only Leopardi. Instead, thank goodness, by grace, he manages to discover another gaze, and he remains still linked to the poet Recanati, as he was linked to many others and many friends, with those who were decisive for him in our past. But he takes some further steps. In the hymn we all know, Alla sua donna, to his woman, Leopardi fears that the beauty that is glimpsed in the beloved woman might be unreachable, like a last affront from the one who wanted us as mortals. Giussani, instead, listening to the lessons from Don Gaetano Corti, was able to recognize with that woman, the one who Christianity calls the Word, that is, beauty. We've heard him say it many, many times. Beauty became man. When I read this part for the first time, he says, I said, what is the Christian message, if not this? So the poetical beauty of Leopardi wounded him, not only because it spoke of the mystery, but also because he recalled him to the urgency that everyone could be reached by that announcement of the Incarnation. So, from one side, his life was marked by the attraction of art. On the other side, at the same time, this attraction brought out in him a passion for man, a devouring passion for all mankind. Thank you, Don Massimo.
So I'd like to ask a question briefly to both of you, starting with Giancarlo. It's a bit more personal. What works have struck you the most? What impact has it had to hear Giussani talk so much about literature? And if I were to make some examples about the works that then marked your story. Yeah, so when I started to follow Giussani, to follow the movement, I discovered a genius. I didn't, not in terms of of anything that infectious, something irregular, something odd, but rather the genome as John Giussani defines it, he who's able to indicate what people can't see and can't figure out for themselves. In Giussani, with Giussani, by following Giussani, following him and all the works he cited, I discovered this. The sort of genealogy in reality. There's an amazing. He had an amazing way of facing reality, of judging it. He had good judgment, CL became known for judgment, for the intelligence of its judgment. And because genius isn't just Einstein discovering reality. Genius is even Eliot, who defines the men of today as, Eliot, to answer your question, T.S. Eliot's the one I like the most. He says, they try to emerge from their interior darkness by dreaming of worlds that are so perfect that it makes being good useless. And that's the morality of today. Still now, when he describes how dramatic the relationship between man and the church was, and thus of man, the relationship of man with truth, with the relationship, the possibility to discover truth, he says, why should mankind love the church? It's soft when it should be hard, and hard when it should be soft. It forgives sins, but it's flexible on the truth. It reminds them things they don't want to hear, that is, that life is death. Why should they love the church then? And in fact, or what Miloš says, I'll say a few sentences here that they're the settings of life here. When he says that to be called is like chewing on a stone. Giussani asked, who are the saints? That they are the true humans, the true people, and I learned this. I recognized this sense of genius there, and that's why I came closer to my faith. According to the definition that Ratzinger gave, faith is an obedience of the heart to the forms of teaching which we've been given. An obedience. To obey means to follow another more than yourself. I think of one thing. I disagree with you, but I trust you to such an extent that I'm willing to obey you, to follow you, because that is faith. When Jesus says, do you want to come along? Because they don't understand. They need to be there anyway. They need to follow. Because faith is trust. You entrust yourself to someone, and this sense of genius is the thing that most attracted me, that most fascinated me, that dragged me alongside with it, that still today keeps me going, and it keeps me on a road that I'm still tempted to leave. Thank you, Giancarlo. Don Massimo, to you the same question.
What impact did it have in you to hear Giussani quoting so many authors? Which works marked you the most?
So I'll read my notes because I'm not able to speak without them. So like I said, Don Giussani made me know authors and texts, not only of literature, but also texts in history and theology that I'd never met. But at the same time, he opened my mind and my curiosity to other authors, not necessarily ones cited or remembered by himself, but simply for the fact that he had deposited in me a seed, the taste for the discovery of the human through words and the works of, as Giancarlo just said, of certain geniuses, of whom history is rich. The genius is the one who finds that which you've always wanted to find, but you only find it when he helps you. So I want to bring here a couple of examples, both of authors that he made me know and that have always accompanied me, also of great poetical and literary works that I often go back to. Paul Claudel. Certainly, Paul Claudel was an author who'd always accompanied my life. Above all, his three theatre works are the fundamentals. Claudel was a prolific author of all sorts, but the Announcement to Mary, many of us know it. Destiny at Midday, I don't know what it's translated as now, and his masterpiece, The Satin Shoes. Claudel's prose is difficult, it's baroque, it's rich of symbols with images that reciprocally point back to each other. It's full of sounds, of colours. So, what did this teach me? The Announcement to Mary. This book, in Baroncini's book, there's a great reading of the Announcement to Mary. I think I've heard him read it and Giussani read it and explain it many times. I'd say this from my side, that the Announcement to Mary and more in general his theatre works, I found a phenomenology of love. A phenomenology of love, both carnal and spiritual. Claudel makes us discover that every love, not only those passionate, suffering ones, but also transgressive ones, carry inside themselves an appeal to eternity and to virginity. All this reveals itself when the man and woman allow themselves to be drawn by the sacrifice of themselves that makes eternal every movement of the heart. During his years in the Lyceum, Don Giussani gave to me some texts of a couple of theologians that I've never left, Henri de Lubac and Jean Danilou. I said he gave me them in my hands because Giussani, he gave books in the people's hands. He handed them over. He recommended, but he also gave people books. Gave books to people who met him, even in the confessional, like we can read in Savarano's Life of Giussani. De Lubac was the great theologian of the 1900s who invited all of the church to rediscover the fathers. His works let us discover or rediscover the treasure of Christian wisdom. And they've constituted the nerve for 2,000 years of history. I remember in high school, he made me read Catholicism by Lubac and Social Dogma. Danilou, as well as a student of Christian origins, was a genius of a catechist. His books, like, for example, God and Us, which had actually influenced the writing of the Religious Sense by Giussani. Even today, these would be fundamental for the growth and the maturity of a man and a woman who want to deepen their reasons for their own faith. It's a shame that it's almost unfindable, because on Danilou there's been a damnatio memoria. He's been hidden away. It's almost impossible to find his books. One day, during a lesson at the Boucher, Giussani said more or less like this: the two greatest authors that Italy has had are Christians, Dante and Manzoni, and they've drawn from their faith their greatness. I can say that the Divine Comedy and the Promessi Sposi, the Betrothed, are an important company for all my life. And so alongside them, I thank God to have given to the world Dostoevsky. Italian poets, Giussani, like I said, cited Pascoli, and then successively he made us read Montale, but these Rebora, for example, the Piopo, and Aida Negri, in which he found profound reverberations of his discovery of man and of the mystery of life. The eternal youth, for example. The mysteriousness of the sense of life that hides itself, that there where, and it comes out to refill our existence. Many other authors had also accompanied my life, not necessarily cited, but many that I'd never heard Giussani cite them. But for me, they had an important part in my poetic readings. But like I said, the important thing is that Giussani had opened my life to the window of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Don Massimo, for this. So now, Giancarlo.
A book on Father Fabio Baroncini has just come out, which collects his encounters on great works proposed by Giussani, and not only, to which you did the introduction. How, looking to Don Giussani and thinking of his person, I'll ask you in this way, direct way, how can we not miss the wealth of works and authors? How to be at the same time not just repeaters but true disciples, reliving his passion and his openness of horizon?
Yeah, so the books, Paranagotti curated it and edited it. You know, it was founded after after Alessandra Pedocchi. You know, we highly value women following Baroncini's example. So, as is often said, you know, many of you probably don't know Baroncini, but he was the first priest of the movement. The first, you know, he was the first person of the movement who became a priest. I don't know if that's true or not, but so they say. You know, once we went to breakfast with Pope John Paul II, and Giussani was there, and the Pope at a certain point said, "So who was the first priest of the movement?" And Giussani said, "Don Fabio Baroncini," and the Pope said, "Oh, who's Baroncini?" You know, he wasn't expecting an accurate answer, because Baroncini said, you know, that he was a follower, that he said he was always a fan of asking again, of following, of repeating, and he said repetition is a kind of trace that repeats itself again. If there's it's not an empty repetition if there's a question at heart. You know, it's not something heavy. Baroncini was exactly that, because he'd always repropose the works that Giussani spoke about and on which he had based his genius as a teacher, as an educator. And he used it as a question, as one of the many questions he had, and questions were the same ones that arose in those who listened to him, and that he carried forwards. Because he often worked with it. He was a great reader, and he'd often read a lot to prepare, and you'll see that in the book. And that there are some authors mentioned there, authors who I'd never heard of before, but there were readings that helped him to carry forwards this great work that he'd done truly systematically, and not many have done this. And he did it for years and years, bringing to the movement thousands of people, thousands of youngsters, of student youth and CL university students. There were years in which, you know, there were kids going to Clu in Milan who were from many towns and cities around Milan, and there are many of us who've lived this experience, because the power, the force of the movement. There was Giussani as a founder, but then those people, there are also these people who followed him. There were people like Don Massimo, who's here now. it wasn't all born from one person. It was born from a community, from communion, and we look at Fabio's readings. They were all done to this end, to repropose this culture that Don Massimo has perfectly explained how things went. He proposed this upon which the sentiment, the sensibility of life was based, and that's what Giussani would base his thought on, and that was how he transmitted it to us. Anyway, reading would often end up, related in conversations with Giussani, because after he read these texts, he'd discuss them. There'd be conversations, debates, bringing things up, and it was the same with Fabio. And Don Fabio was for years the point of reference for many people who struggled, who had problems, etc. So that we truly do feel his loss, and it was a heavy loss. But he was always one who followed. He was a follower, and he put his life at Don Giussani's disposal, and for this he became a parish priest. He had a great openness, because not only did he help CL people, he helped everyone, the people in his parish, everyone. He was always one step behind, following, so much so that his motto, he'd say two things. First, that we're here provisionally speaking. The second point was that to stand in front, behind walls, in front of cannons, and far away from your superiors. And that was how he would discuss. This is how he lived authority, following. He followed and he served. For this, we're very grateful. Thank you. I'll add a question on. If you'll permit me, I'll make another rapid-fire question to each of you to conclude. The first for Don Massimo is this. Perhaps even just because of my age, I was impacted. I was, it left a mark, and I followed because of the care that Don Giussani gave, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the final years of his life to the Virgin, and he was sustained by the words of Dante, on the comment from Dante's works in Paradise. My question is this: how did literature help him, if I'm not mistaken, this final phase of his life where he was more dedicated, the phase of the final years of his life in which his attention was most focused on the Virgin? So could you tell us, how did Dante help Giussani in this? Why did he dedicate so much of his effort, for example, on the hymn to the Virgin?
I think that the last years of Giussani's life, that his interventions, though even sort of fragmented, that they haven't really been adequately meditated on. And it's natural that it's like this, because not enough time has passed. And then to enter in these discussions, in these words, in this mystical dimension of Giussani, we need to be mystics. And it's not by chance that he chose Saint Bernard. He didn't choose, he was chosen by Saint Bernard. He felt such a commonness, not so much of words, but of experiences, with the final experience of a poet who entrusts to a mystic for doing the last steps of his life. To feel that Bernard was like a companion on his journey. Giussani had Virgil as a companion. He was the man of reason. He had a companion, Beatrice from Dante, the singer of grace. He had another companion, was at the end Bernard. That is, he was a man who was let himself be thrown open by something unsayable. We think about mercy. We need to way to cut that out of the vocabulary because it's not a word that man. It's not a word that describes something that man can really describe, and it's something that's unsayable, that comes from beyond. So I think therefore that the last chapter of my book dedicated to Mary, I've not only, I'd say, been happy, but enjoyed and was wondering, was amazed by grasping together all these different fragments, collecting them up, that are like lightning flashes in the light, in the night. So they're not definitions. When Giussani says Mary, in her there's all of humanity. All of humanity is gathered together and enclosed in Mary. He has these expressions about Our Lady that are truly these great, of great men of the Church in the history of the Church, who were thrown into the depths over the threshold of the mystery. And so I think that his life could be seen from a point of view of Dante's point of view, like in the Virgil, Beatrice, and Saint Bernard. I think in that order. This has just come to mind. Thank you. Last question for you, Giancarlo. So, hearing also these interventions tried this afternoon, it's amazing. It's great. So this widening of horizons, so many authors, and you gave a hint about the discovery of the intelligence of faith. So my question is this: can we deepen this? Can you help us understand? Because it's desirable, this openness of your mind, this opening, this passion. So could you help us deepen what the intelligence of faith is for Don Giussani?
So the intelligence of faith, which I think is also the reason behind all this reading he did. That's what these authors are, who are truly moving authors, what they're trying to convey. The intelligence of faith is a deep understanding of reality, which is not derived necessarily from an intellectual analysis of things, but rather, that also, but it's more of a secondary aspect. It derives primarily from a sense of attraction, from an infectious energy, from the effort, from using one's own energy to interact with people, with reality, and this is where intelligence comes from. It's effective. Without it, there is no intelligence. It's something clear that otherwise you can't get into the depths of things. Whereas true intelligence wounds, it cuts, it hurts he who understands and he who hears. And from Don Giussani, from this point of view, truly taught us a lot. Because there's it's a bit of a silly phrase, but I'd always say that by hearing Giussani, you can hear that Christianity isn't something for old ladies. It's quite the opposite. It's something deeply serious. It's not something for stupid children. It implies a deep relationship with reality, and you need to find this infectious energy and make it be reborn and use it, as he said in '84. When as he was looking at when he was looking over the Clue guys, and he said, "You guys are great. You're strong. You're nice like we were back in the day, but Chernobyl had just happened, and it's as if you guys have been hit by radiation. You guys have been emptied. You've been sapped of your effective energy. And so how do you make this energy come back? How can it be reborn? With homilies? With moralistic sermons? No. You do it with an encounter. That is something which, how can I say, that kicks off, that sets in motion all of one's being, your intelligence, but also your emotions, your emotiveness, your affection, and we need this encounter. We need to pray to the Virgin that she may help us to always see this possibility, to not lose ourselves, because the experience we live, an experience like ours, is one of enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, that means having God within man. This is true intelligence. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to thank our guests, Giancarlo and Don Massimo, for the beauty of this encounter, of this conference, and the richness of their answers to our questions, and as well as the opening up the possibility for us to help have our desire to know things reborn, to meet these authors, to reread the Giussani's words, to reopen our horizons, open our hearts and our minds to this greatness, this vast intelligence. So to conclude, I'd like to read you 3 lines from this letter that Pope Francis wrote, which I think is a good synthesis of many of the things that have come out. This letter on the role of literature in formation, which I think he says because it's a truly important theme. The urgent task, he says, of all of us, because he says that he calls us missionaries, is so that we may all be able to encounter Jesus Christ made flesh, made man, made history. We must always take care never to lose sight of the flesh of Jesus Christ, that flesh made of passions, emotions, and feelings, words that challenge and console, hands that touch and heal, looks that liberate and encourage, hospitality, forgiveness, indignation, courage, fearlessness, in a word, love. And it's precisely at this level, the Pope says, that familiarity with literature can make future priests, but then he says, but also all people, all the more sensitive to the full humanity of the Lord Jesus, in which his divinity is wholly present. So that beauty, that it intercepts us, it comes to meet us, and then we can see that man flourishes with this through this literature, and that's how we can find the person of Jesus Christ. Before thanking again our guests, a notice. In this particular historic moment, where more uncertainties ask us, how is it possible to build a dialogue of peace? We couldn't not feel ourselves called to what Cardinal Piazzaballa said at the inaugural address. For this reason, the meeting will give back part of its donations raised over the course of this week to humanitarian emergencies in the Holy Land. And this is an invitation to donate with generosity. I'd like to thank Don Massimo and Giancarlo, and everyone have a great meeting.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
voltato improvvisamente la gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene. Si è voltato improvvisamente la gente che era lì e ha detto: la gente che cosa dice che io sia? Chi dice che io sia? E voi chi dite che io sia?
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'Iter Communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'Iter Communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene,